Welcome to this edition of the Legislative Reference Bureau's Oral History Project. Some months ago, we spoke to Governor Tommy Thompson, and we were interrupted, and now Governor Thompson is good enough to come back, and we'll take things up right in 1986. You were just about to run for governor, or just running for governor when we last spoke. You had mentioned that you had invited Jim Clouser to be your to run your campaign and make sure you didn't go into debt. That was his main directive.
That is absolutely correct.
And you had mentioned that you were down to $18.86 at one point.
It was an interesting discussion because I told Jim, I said, you know, all I want, you know, because Jim was reluctant to be my manager because he had gone through a campaign before.
Which one was that? Do you know?
It was I can't remember what it was. He had just finished it up, and he hadn't done well, and he was so much work, and he said, I just don't want to do that. He said, I want to take life easy, I want to sail, and so on. I said, Jim, all I want you to do is to come in and check and keep me out of debt. I said, I've got a young family, I'm not working, and I got my wife and 3 kids, and I cannot afford to go in debt because all the assets I have is the house that I've got a mortgage on, the farm that's got a big mortgage on, and this car. And so I said, I can't go in debt because there's no way that I can pay it back. So I said, you got to watch. He said, okay. So about every other day or other day, he'd walk over to, we had an office downstairs next to the Inn on the Park. Jerry Mullins gave us his office very cheap, but it was in the basement. You had to go up the steps to get outside on the street on the corner of the square. And he would walk over there and look at the books, and he called me one day and he said, this was before the Republican State Convention, and he said, I got to talk to you. So I went over there, and I don't know, we had saved some money, and we had maybe close to $100,000, or maybe 75, 100, somewhere in that area. He says, Tommy, I got to have your permission because I'm going to ask you to do something that you're going to be very much opposed to. And I said, well, what is it? He says, I want to spend all of our money before we go to the convention on television ads so that the people in this state, people in your area know who you are, but I want to make sure everybody in the convention knows that we are up on television and that we're going to be really an active campaign and candidate. And he says it's going to cost us about $75,000 to get on television before the Republican convention. But he says they're going to be asking, you know, they're going to have a popularity poll, and you got to win that, and we can't afford to take a gamble. He said if we don't do it, we may not win the popularity poll at the convention. If you don't win that, you probably are not going to be able to win the primary. And so I got to have your permission to do that. I said, well, let's shoot for the moon. And so we hired somebody to do some TV ads that were not very good, but at least they got us on the air. And we went to the convention, and we won. I think we won by almost 2-to-1 margin. Clouser thought that was very, very good. And so the following week after the convention, Jim wanted another meeting, and he said we applied for state funding, but we're not going to get it until after the primary. And he says we're down to $18.86 or 84 cents. I can't exactly remember. Remember the $18. I said, well, Jim, I said, what are we going to do? He said, we're going to have to figure out a way to raise some money in order to get through the summer and before we get the check from the state in the fall.
What month would that have been?
That would have been in June.
June.
So we had
primaries in September.
In September. So we had to get through July, August, September. So we went out and we raised money, went to fundraisers and so on and so forth, and somehow we cobbled it together. But the lowest we ever got was the $18.84, and we got enough money to get us by, and we won the convention, and it was Jim's gamble, and I was really nervous about it, but it worked out okay, and that's what happened.
And you were running against who? Jonathan Berry, was it?
There were 7 of them. There was
Seven of
Jonathan
them?
Berry. There was a professor at the university. I can't remember his name. There was George Watts.
George Watts from Milwaukee. Yeah.
George Watts from Milwaukee, Jonathan Berry, and the professor. Those were the 3 main ones. Then there was a barber from Jose from Milwaukee, and Jonathan Berry, and those were the 3 main ones. And then the barber Jose. And I guess maybe there was 5.
Do you have any worries about the primary after the convention? Were you pretty sure you were going to win it?
No, I was worried about it because Jonathan Berry had a lot of support coming from the Democratic Party, and he had a lot of people from Madison supporting him, and George Watts had a lot of money. He had a lot of people from Milwaukee, so it was Dane County and Milwaukee County that were the bastions of opposition. One was for George Watts, and and Dane County was for Jonathan Berry. And so I had to make sure I got to Fox Valley in rural Wisconsin and pick up Waukesha. That was our plans, and we executed by spending a lot of time. None of the other candidates traveled like I did. I was all over and traveling all over and going, from Superior to Milwaukee to Waukesha to Hudson and across the road to Green Bay. I can remember two things. One day, somebody from St. Croix County called me up and said, we're having a Sunday event. The lowest point in that first campaign was not the fact of spending the money. That was made me nervous. The lowest point is Sunday up in Hudson, Wisconsin. This individual was supporting him, said, you have to come up to this Republican a picnic on a Sunday. All the candidates are going to be there, and you got to come. And it was on a Sunday afternoon. And Sundays, we tried to just relax a little bit so I could spend some time with my family. But John Trees, who was the sergeant from the Milwaukee Police Officers Association, had disability coverage, and he had taken a leave of absence from the police department. He was my driver. And I called him and says, yeah, I'll drive you up there. On Sunday, he said, I hate to, but I said I will. We went clear up to Hudson on a Sunday afternoon, and the guy that had insisted that I come was in Florida, and there were 15 people there, 3 of which were candidates, and none of the other gubernatorial candidates. I went up there. I was so frustrated, so down that I'd driven
3 hours each way, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, and get up there, and there was no voters. And I knew all the people that were there, and they were very happy to see me, but for 15 votes, of which 3 or 4 were county candidates, I think there were 10 outside independent voters actually were Republicans, but it was the kind of thing I think that actually made me win the primary, because I was willing to do that, and none of the other candidates wanted to do that. And I can also remember the night that I was so tired, and we were, before John Trees was driving me, or one night that he was not with me, and I was going across on 29, the bloody 29, with a lot of people. I promised the people that I was going to rebuild State Highway 29 into a 4-lane highway, and I did. It was one of my campaign promises. And I can remember that night I was driving alone, and I fell asleep. And I went in the ditch, woke up, and I was in the ditch, and I couldn't get out, and I had to go get a farmer. I never found that farmer again, but he got his tractor and pulled me out. And we didn't call the police. We just took off, and I went to Green Bay and made it the next morning. But the campaign could have ended that night on 29. And
did the farmer know who he had pulled out of the ditch?
He knew I was a candidate.
Yeah.
He had heard of Tommy Thompson. He was very kind. I think I gave him $20 for getting up, but I think it was 11:30, 12:30 in the evening when he did that. And I always remember that, because I used that story on a couple of occasions, and I said, someday I'm going to get elected, and I'm going to rebuild Highway 29. And when I hired Ron Fiedler to do it, I said, we're going to build highways that are safe across America, across Wisconsin. And we built the Platteville 4-lane highway from Platteville to Madison. We built the 4-lane highway across 29. It was my 2020s project that I started when my first term as governor.
Ran across some news coverage contemporary to the campaign that indicated your style of speaking changed in 1986. Is there any truth to that? Was that a conscious decision?
No,
You're more
I don't
polished
know.
after running for statewide office?
You became much more comfortable speaking. You know, I was very loud and boisterous, and I was criticized for being so shouty. And I developed a different technique. I'm still loud, but I modulate my voice, and I'm able to give a fairly decent speech. And I've had a lot of training, not by outside professionals, all self-induced and self-trained. But my speaking did change. There was a reporter, Ann Curley, I think her name was, for the Milwaukee Journal, and we, since then we have had some discussions about that. I can remember this to this day. I was at the Wisconsin Manufacturing Association, and I thought I gave a really wonderful speech.
This is in '86.
Yeah, and it was '86, and there was candidates, and I was the speaker at the Wisconsin Manufacturing Association, and I thought I really got a good speech. I think I got a lot of applause. I think I even got a few people to stand up, but she didn't like my speaking ability or the volume. She said, Tommy Thompson doesn't have a chance. He's just he's a rural legislator that shouts all the time, and he drops his ings and a few other things. It was I was waiting for the article on a Sunday because I thought, she's going to really write a good article because the people were with me. But it was just absolutely devastating to me as a person because she insulted me in so many different ways, and I never kept the article, but it was in the Milwaukee Journal. Ann Curley, I can still remember it, and I saw her after I got elected, and she started covering up her face, and she said, "Oh my Lord, Tommy, I didn't think you had a chance," and then she left, and she became some sort of a in the business world. So every time I saw her, she says, "I'm not shouting anymore, Ann," and then I'd shout. And we'd always have a great laugh. We became good friends, and I think she supported me after that first one. But boy, she really did a job on tearing me down. So it was Ann Curley's the speaking, which you raised, in that in the ditch, going in the ditch on Highway 29, and also the driving 3.5 hours to Hudson on a Sunday afternoon.
Very intimate gathering in Hudson.
Were some of my really, really low points in that first campaign, along with Klauser spending all the money.
Well, you got through the primary. Were you more confident about the general election?
What happened at the primary was interesting. It was a rainy night, and Klauser and there were six of us, 6 couples. We were down in Milwaukee. And we had dinner, and before that, the week before that was the general election, but we went down to Milwaukee thinking we had to be on the Milwaukee TV. We had a good feeling that we were going to do well. Never expected to do as well as we did because we got over 50% of the vote in the primary. There were 5 candidates, and Jonathan Berry came in second, and George Watts came in third. I think Jonathan got 21, and
I've got that here
George Watts had 18. I think I got 51 or 52%. And it was raining, and we went on television. It was so overwhelming that they called it. The TV stations wanted us to go on, and we went to the Astor Hotel. That was going to be our party, and the TVs were hooked up, and I was on live at 10 o'clock. And for some reason, they had Tony Earl get on. It was a split screen. And a lot of us think, I didn't, but a lot of people thought that Tony Earl made a terrible mistake. Tony Earl and I were friends. We'd worked in the legislature, gone up, and he didn't think he had much of a challenge from me, so he got on television, which, he probably should not have. His advisors probably would. He got on to congratulate me on live TV. Somebody had called him and said, "Sure, I'll go on and congratulate Tommy because they were afraid of Jonathan Berry.
There seemed to be a vibe that they were more worried about Berry than
they were
than
worried
you.
about Berry, and they were not worried a bit about me. So they thought, they had dodged a bullet. They thought, that it would be good to, to encourage me. And so they got on television, Tony did, and the news, newsmen like yourself and everybody else, what's the first thing you get? Two competitors out there, you ask questions. And Tony was not ready for the questions, and I guess I had been so used to being asking questions up to the primary that I was ready to go. And people said, it was almost like a mini debate, and Tony didn't do well because he was not prepared. He probably had a couple beers. I'm not saying he did or not. It just, he probably was just being nice. And they asked questions, and I answered them, and he answered them. And somebody said, well, Tommy Thompson held his own that night. And so the next day, it was not only that Tommy Thompson won, but they had the first debate, and Tommy Thompson acquitted himself quite nicely on television against Tony Earl. So it was really a sort of a thing that the people saw that said, this guy's for real. This guy can be governor, and this guy can handle himself okay. And he did a good job.
Set the tone for November?
Set the tone for November. And that was it. And Tony made a couple big mistakes. Tony and Sue Ellen Albrecht, who I just noticed passed away in Indiana, was the chairwoman of the Democratic Party. And she came on and she said, we have nothing to worry about. Tommy Thompson is not going to be much of a candidate. And they didn't bother to raise any money. And so the money started pouring in, after the primary. Plus we got the grant from the state. So we, for somebody had to count their nickels to get through and pay the rent and pay the help, which was very, very small. We felt, like something really was great, and money kept rolling in during the month of September, and we went up on television right away. And Tony was not prepared to go up on television, and we put that one ad. There was Klauser found this gentleman that produced the ads, and he had a drinking problem, but he was good in the morning, and we had probably the best ad that had been up to that time, a campaign ad. We had the stadium, a big jail, dropping out of the sky. Yeah. Remember that in Milwaukee? And Henry Meyer, the big Democrat from Milwaukee, was helpful behind the scenes. He didn't want that prison built in Milwaukee, and he wanted to keep it out of Milwaukee. And
what did he do to help you?
He introduced me to a lot of people, and he put some of his campaign people into our campaign, and he also introduced me to the. This is a cute story. Introduced me to the mayor of Kenosha, and he says you gotta go down and see. What was his name? Bellotti? Yeah, Bellotti. He had won his previous mayoral campaign by 1 or 2 or 3, less than 10 votes. Landslide Joe or Sam, I can't remember. I did appoint him in the government when I got elected, but I went down there, and Kenosha is such a strong Democratic bastion that when I got there, he told me not to come in the front door.
Really?
Here I'm I just won the primary and won the thing, and we were doing well and picking up steam, and
they sneak you in the back door.
Joe Bellotti, the mayor of Kenosha.
I don't know what.
But anyway, he says, don't come in. He said, I'll come out and see you. So John Trees and I were in the parking lot. It's hard to believe this would happen, but it did. And we were sitting in the parking lot. Out comes the mayor, covered up so nobody could see him. Comes out the back door and whispers, rolls down the window, and he whispers to us. I mean, here it's noon, and people are around. And he's whispering. He says, I'm going to turn around and walk in that door, and I'm going to leave it open. Don't come in until after I go in, and come up the back door. My secretary will get you into the office. Now, here I'm down because Mayor Meyer asked me to go down and see him, and I went down there, and he was acting like he was petrified that somebody would see him with Tommy Thompson, a Republican. He was so afraid, of his shadow and the fact that I was a Republican and being in Kenosha County. So, you know, we had done the trip, and I said, John, should we just blow this off? No, John says, we'll humor him, go in and see what he's got to offer. So we went in and went up the back door, out the back door and went up the back steps and met by his secretary, went in his office, gave us, I think he gave us a glass of water. I don't even think he gave us coffee or asked us. We sat down and he said, I got 15 minutes. He said, what do you want? I said, I want your support. He said, I can't support you. You're a Republican. I said, okay. And, but he says, he gave me a few names, and he says, you know, the mayor had called him, and Mayor Meyer had called and asked him to meet with me, so he did. And so it was more of a favor to Mayor Meyer, not because he liked me. And so we left in 15 minutes, and it was just an absolute wasted trip for me. But it's amazing that I really loved Kenosha. And even though I did not win Kenosha the first time, the primary, or the first time I ran against Tony Arrow, I carried Kenosha every time after that. And no Republicans ever done that. Carried the city of Kenosha. People really, really responded to me. So even though Mayor Bellotti was, and then after I got elected, he called me up and says, God, we won. We won, Tommy, we did it. And so he took credit, and he finally came to work. I think he got defeated for mayor, and I gave him a job. I think in the lottery or something. But he did work for me, for the Thompson administration after that.
What would you have done if you'd lost? You'd been out of the assembly.
I would have gone back and practiced law, and I had a small farm. I would have practiced law, and back in Wisconsin, I had given up the law practice, and my partner was handling it. So I decided I was going to give 1 full year to the campaign. So my wife was a teacher. We lived, and I was still in the assembly, and I still was minority leader. I was still working in the assembly, but I didn't practice law, so I had no money coming in except for the assembly and my wife's thing, and we were running around the state. So I just figured I was going to give it the old college try. My wife didn't think I could win. My wife would encourage me. I asked my wife if she wanted me to run, and I found out later why. Because I was in the National Guard, and I was in the state legislature, and I was farming, and I was practicing law. She thought that I didn't have a chance to win, which most people didn't, and she thought that I would come back and practice law and be a good husband and spend my time with raising the kids. So she was all for it because she thought I was going to lose. And they campaigned hard for me, but they never really thought that I had a chance to win. I did, Clauser did, but we were about the only two that thought that we could win. Terry Kohler did, because he gave me the poll, as I told you.
Yes.
And he said, you can win. And so that's what happened.
Now, one of the first things you did after you were elected, you had appointed a Democrat to your cabinet.
That was an interesting thing.
Tim Cullen.
Yeah.
How did that work? Did you have to negotiate with each other how that was going to go? Did you get any pushback in your own party as to why you're bringing this Democrat into the family?
No, everybody thought it was a coup. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, everybody. It was an interesting thing because I got a couple things. First off, Clauser, the week before the general election, he called me up and he said, Tommy, he said, I need to talk to you. Every time Clauser said that, it was bad news.
I'm getting that pattern.
Yeah, getting that pattern. He said, I got to talk to you. And he said, such a beautiful day out. He said, let's walk around the square and talk. Nobody can bother us, just you and me. So week to 10 days, Jim Clauser and I walked around the square. I was in the legislature for some business, and he called me. So I came down, and we walked around the square. And Clauser said, Tommy, I've been looking at all the polls. The first really indication we were going to win is we went down to Cheese Days in Monroe, which is every other year. And it was on a Sunday. And I went down to Monroe. This is before this event. Went down, and the Milwaukee Journal came out with a poll that day. And I knew that was coming, so we pulled in to pick up the Milwaukee Journal on my way out to Monroe. And I looked at it, and we were winning. I think we were up by 5 points. And everybody, I mean, the Democrats said that poll is wrong. It didn't have it. There's no chance. Tony Earl we got internal polls. We're way out in front. We looked at the poll. We knew it was pretty accurate because it was pretty much close to what we had seen. And so that made us feel good. And so that poll plus a couple other ones, this was in October, and then Clouser comes and says, I got to walk you around. I need to see you. So we walk around the square, and Clouser said, you know, I've been looking at the polls, looking at all the things that are happening. He says, we're going to win. And the road contractors were supporting me, and and the builders had taken me, and they'd all taken some polls, and you know, relatively close to the election, and they gave it to Clouser, and Clouser says, you know, the polls look really good, and somebody, Jim Wimmer, I think was the head of the road builders at that time, had gone someplace up in the Fox Valley and come back to report to Jim, and he says, everybody's talking about you guys. Everybody's talking about, you know, that Tommy is all over, and everybody is really getting enthused that we're going to win. And so Clouser had this confab with me, and we went around, and he said, you know, Tommy, I think you're going to win. And he said, now we got to figure out what we're going to do. We got to plan a government. And he said, you know, I told you I'd never come back in the government, but he said, I've been looking at Department of Administration. And he says, if we can restructure DOA and give me some more power to help you, he said, I'm willing to talk to Shirley about giving up my law practice, because he was a lobbyist in law practice. Jim was doing quite well. He said, it's going to be a real financial hit to me. But he said, I really think I want to do this. I got to go talk to Shirley, but I don't want to do it until I talk to you. So I said, well, Jim, I always expected you would, you know, that you would do it, because he had gone from just counting the coins,
counting the $18,
the $18 to being the instrumental leader, the spokesperson, and so on. And he liked it. And so I said, absolutely. And he said, you sure? And I said, of course. He said, we're a team. I said, we're going to run the state. We're going to do an excellent job. We'll probably never get reelected, but for 4 years, we're going to do a lot of good. He says, okay, count me in. So we went and talked to Shirley, and she said, go ahead. And so that was it. So Clouser, that's how Clouser made the decision. A week to 10 days before, walking around the square, asking me if I would appoint him as DOA. He said, I'm looking at it, I can do this and that. So that took place.
And then how did you get to Cullen?
Well, Cullen was an interesting thing, because after the election, the next morning we were over in what's the motel right across the street here?
The one in the park?
No, the other one.
Concourse.
Concourse.
Yeah.
Concourse. And we were over there, and the next day I had my first press conference, and I appointed Jim Clouser as Secretary of Administration. And then I said, well, we're going to have to put together a cabinet. And so Jim called me and said, I got to see you. Another one of Clouser's mandatory get-togethers. And I said, and Tim Cullen was already being talked about as my opponent in 4 years. And Clouser said, you know, I think we can get Tim Cullen to come in the administration. I said, you're crazy. Tim Cullen's going to run against us in 4 years. He's going to run against me, and he probably has got a good chance to win. Why would he give that up? He's a majority leader. Well, he said, I just had Tim and I get along well, and I just mentioned it to Tim. I says, how would you? I says, you're going to stick around for 4 years. You're going to fight Tommy Thompson. You're not going to win. You're going to run again in 4 years. He said, why don't you come in the administration? Let's have a bipartisan and really do something great. And Cullen says, okay, I'll think about it. And so this was on a Tuesday, and I said, well, I don't think there's any chance. On Wednesday, Clouser calls me back and he said, I just had lunch with Tim, and he said he's warming up to the idea. I said, my Lord, wouldn't that be something? Because, a lot of people didn't think that we knew anything about governing, and Sue Ellen Albright made some pretty, bad charges against me, and said that her IQ was no, my IQ was smaller than her bra size. I still remember that, and so we just thought about it. And then on Thursday, Clauser had another meeting with him, and Cullen said, "Well, what cabinet post would I get?" He said, "I would be interested in transportation or HN, Health and Human Services." Clauser says, "Tommy doesn't care. Pick whatever you want to." And so this was on Thursday. On Friday, he had another meeting with Tim Cullen. And Tim Cullen said, well, he said, "Can I be Health and Human Services Secretary? And will you keep me for 4 years?" Jim says, "Of course. Your choice." And so Clauser couldn't contain himself. He came over to see me, and I was in the temporary office, trying to put together. We were recruiting people and so on and so forth. A lot of things were happening right after that. And so came in and he said, "Tim's ready to do it." I said, "Wow, that is really a coup." And so I said, "We got to announce it right away. We can't let this thing, because nobody knows about it except Clauser, Cullen, and myself." And so I said, "We got to do it on Monday." Jim said, "I don't know if he'll do it that fast." I said, "We got to." I said, "If it lasts till Tuesday or Wednesday, he'll back out, or the Democrats will find out about it and put so much pressure on him he can't do it." So I found out that, first off, they cut the deal on Friday afternoon. Tim said, "Yeah, let's get it behind us right away." And so Monday morning at 10:30, but the night before, Sunday night, Tony Earl had invited Tom Loftus and his wife and Tim Cullen and his wife to the mansion for dinner. And every time there's a new governor, there was some entrepreneur from Milwaukee had put in a wine cabinet, small wine cooler. Thought it was great, but it was a wine refrigerator, and he stocked it with special bottles of wine that each governor, and we did it with the Historical Society, had one special bottle of wine to drink each once in his term. And Tony Earl had kept that till the Sunday night. And you're supposed to fill out who was with you.
Okay.
And fill out who was with you and file it and what kind of a wine it was and give it to the Historical Society. And so he did it that Sunday night with Tom. I found this out when I looked back at the records, that Tony Earl had used up this special bottle of wine for Tim Cullen and his wife and Tom Loftus and his wife.
He had no inkling.
No inkling. And so the next morning, 9:30, 10 o'clock on a Monday, we're, right where the minority leader's office. We were right next door. And so we went in there, and the press was there. I said, "I got a special announcement to make." And I sat down with Clauser, and in walks Tim Cullen. And, I mean, the press is just, what's Cullen doing here? And Tim Cullen comes over and sits down next to me on my right-hand side. Clauser's on my left. I'm facing the press, and Tim Cullen comes in. The press knows something's up, but doesn't know what it is. And I said, "I want everybody to I know you all know him, but I am very happy to be able to announce today that the new Secretary of Health and Human Services is going to be Majority Leader Tim Cullen." The press went wild. They ran out of the Capitol. We were in the back of the Assembly chambers. They ran out filing their stories, calling people, and the press loved it. I mean, and somebody said, "We didn't know what kind of a governor Tommy Thompson's going to be, but if this is the kind of government he's putting together, more power to him and congratulations." It was fantastic. And so that's the Tim Cullen. But I got to tell you another cute story about. You asked me these questions. I keep throwing things up, but
go ahead.
There was the. Did you know Jackson? Lowell Jackson. Yeah. Lowell Jackson, of course, had run for governor on the Republican. His wife had worked for me when I was minority leader. She was my secretary, and he had been Tony Earl's Secretary of Transportation. And so he just expected, almost demanded, that I appoint him as Secretary of Transportation. And I knew that that was not good, because he came in and told me what we were going to do. Didn't ask, just came in and said, now, what we have to do, Tommy, never even said, you know, he wanted to continue on as Secretary of Transportation. And he just came in and just walked in and sat down and told me what we were going to do for the next 4 years of transportation and how he was going to do it. And he said, you don't need to worry about transit, I'll handle it all. And I said, Lowell, I said, I'm not even sure I'm going to appoint you. You could have heard a pin drop. He was so cocksure.
You were just certain he would be reappointed.
Absolutely, and he was already telling me, and I knew that was going to be the kind of secretary he was going to be. He was going to try and be the mini governor, because he had run and lost, and then Tony Earl had picked him up. He ran against I think who was it? There was a primary, and he went around the state, and he lost in the primary, and then Tony Earl liked him and appointed him secretary, and he just expected it. So then I said, no, I'm gonna invite some other people in, and he said, well, you make it fast, because I'm not going to be fooling around, and I've got a lot of things to do in the Department of Transportation. I know you're going to end up appointing me. And I walked, and my head was just swimming. I thought, this guy is so arrogant, almost demanding that I just, you know. And I said, well, I got to go through the process. He said, okay. And so in I called Ron Fiedler, who his father had been a transportation commissioner, and just a great guy, and he was an engineer. And I asked Ron Fiedler to come in and talk to me. And so Ron came in, and I said, I really would like to have you consider. He had just left the department and gone into the engineering, I can't remember which engineering firm it was, but he was, and he was very happy. And his father, Ron Fiedler, my father was on the Road and Bridge Committee in Juneau County, and he had known Vera Fiedler, Ron's father, and he said, you know, our fathers knew each other, and they were very close friends, and they were very interested in building good roads. And he said, I told Ron, I said, I want you to come in and be the Secretary of Transportation, and I want to rebuild Wisconsin transportation. And Ron said, well, that's very interesting, but he said, I'm happy. And I said, I'm making money. And they said, I got my pension or retirement already set up, so I really don't need to come back. And I said, you think about it. And this was the middle of the week, and on Friday, I said, I'd like to know by Friday, because I wanted to get moving. And so he called me on Friday. He said, you know, I've been thinking about it. I can't sleep. I was so excited. I want to do this, and I know my father would want me to do it. And he said, we can really build a thing. So I said, fine. So then I called up, on Friday afternoon, I called up Lowell Jackson and said, Lowell, I'm not going to appoint you. I'm appointing somebody else. He slammed the phone down. He says, goodbye. Didn't even wait to find out who I was going to reappoint. And so he read about it, but he couldn't get out of the department fast enough after I did it. He went to work. He got to become Secretary of Transportation for another Democrat governor out in Colorado, Roy Romer, who fired him or let him go. I don't know, whatever. But it was not a happy. And knowing Roy Romer, I could see that they would clash. And then he went to Michigan.
Yeah, I didn't know Lowell Jackson had gone up to Colorado.
And he went to Colorado, and it was the Secretary of Transportation for Roy Romer, Democrat, came in with me. So.
It's one thing in particular.
More stuff that you want to know. You know, you ask me a question and things, and I don't. It comes back to me.
Your first budget had AFTC cut, a welfare cut, that was done by item veto. I wanted to ask you about that in particular, because it was very controversial at the time.
Very controversial.
Was there a lot of...
Very controversial about Tim Cullen, too.
That's what I was going to ask. Did you get any opposition from your administration?
Tim Cullen was very opposed. He
advised you not to do it.
He advised me not to do it.
What about within the Republican caucus in the legislature? What did they have to say?
It was my idea, so the caucus really...
But they had to go through the override vote.
They had to go through... I told both caucuses, I said, we're minorities. I mean, the Democrats control both houses. I said, the only way we're going to be an effective administration is if you may have to hold your nose, but you're going to have to promise me You know, I will treat you correctly, and I will tell you what I'm going to be doing up front. But you've got to be able to sustain every veto I give. And the leadership committed, we will stand behind you, Governor. Because, you know, I had served with all of these guys. So for 20 years, minority, I brought a lot of them in, and they wanted me to succeed. And I said, the only way that I can succeed, which means you succeed, is if you support me on every veto. And so I made a commitment. They made a commitment that they would do it. So I only came close to losing once, and the strange thing about it was Elizabeth Coggs, a Democrat, voted with me to sustain that veto. Otherwise, that one would have been overridden. But every other time the Republicans were there, sometimes it was a lot of arm twisting, but they always did it. I never had a veto overridden while I was governor in 14 years. But you know, I put it in. Betty Jo Nelson was the minority leader. She was very supportive, and she wanted to be very helpful. And I worked with all these assembly people, so I knew pretty well that I would do well in the assembly. The Senate, I wasn't always sure, but Alan Lissay was my roommate. We had an apartment downtown, so I had Alan Lissay handle the Senate for me. So we were in pretty good shape. So and they wanted, the welfare thing had gotten completely out of control. You know, one of the debates with Tony Earl was was on the University of Wisconsin campus, and Tony Earl, we were talking about welfare, and Tony Earl says, we don't need to worry. You know, the way you're talking, you're going to make Wisconsin just like the state of Mississippi, and open it up. And I came back with a zinger. I says, Tony, with you as governor, all the individuals from Mississippi are already coming to Wisconsin because of your liberal philosophy and your high welfare payments. And that put Tony Earl in his place, and it really was the soundbite that was used in the campaign very effectively against Tony Earl. And it was really, Tony Earl had thought he was going to put me down, and I came back with a zinger about, under your leadership, all the individual welfare mothers are coming to Wisconsin because of your generous handouts, and that made things. So welfare had become an issue between Tony Earl and myself, and it was really an issue in Wisconsin because the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times had written several articles about people from Milwaukee, from Chicago coming to Milwaukee, and there was a sign in one of the billboards down at the Greyhound bus depot in Chicago that says, all you have to do is spend $25, get a round trip ticket to Milwaukee, and get on the bus, go up and sign up for welfare, and pick up your check and come back to Chicago. Nobody was watching it. People had seen this, and they were writing about it, and I said, I'm going to change that. So all of these stories about the welfare cheats and the welfare people coming into Wisconsin to get generous welfare payments had made all the national press. So there was a lot of press about Wisconsin's generous welfare payments, the highest in the Midwest. And so when I put this in to cut the welfare payments, and I said I'm going to use the cut to really enhance the benefits, because if you remember correctly, I don't know if I told you this, I had invited welfare mothers out to the executive residence on a weekly basis for about 6 straight weeks. And I'd invite them out for lunch, and they could only come themselves. They couldn't bring their caseworkers, and just themselves and myself. I wouldn't have anybody in the lunch at the executive residence.
What did you talk to them about?
Well, that's the reason. That's the reason for welfare reform, and because I sat down and would have lunch, and first off, they're shocked that they would be invited to the executive residence to meet with the governor and have lunch with the governor at the residence, and so they'd invite about 15 welfare mothers from all over the state on different occasions, and I said, I want to find out from welfare mothers why they are not working and what's the reason. And so I had a set agenda, and I'd start talking, and they would be really uneasy about talking to me because they didn't know who I was, and they didn't know why they were there. And I said, why don't you work? And they said, welfare mothers would say, well, if I go to work, I lose all my health care for my children. And I said, we can't afford that. I said, well, you know, that makes sense. I said, what if I provide you with health care? This is over 6 weeks of weekly meetings. And it was 4 things.
Was Secretary Cullen part of this?
No, nobody was. Just me.
Just the governor.
Just myself. And I said, I want to do what is right for you. And I said, what if I provide health care? She said, that'd be good, but who's going to take care of the kids if I go to work? I said, well, you got a point. I said, what if I provide daycare for you? Well, that would be good. But who's going to, you know, the problem is I dropped out of school when I was 12, 13, 14, 15 and had a child. And I say, I have no training. That makes sense. What if I provide health care, daycare, and set you up in a vocational training? I said, I'll set you up in a vocational training that people are hiring, that there's going to be jobs out there. They said, that'd be fantastic. But I said, well, what's now? They said, well, what happens if we do this, and but most of the jobs are outside of where we live? I said, well, then I have to provide transportation for you. And I said, would you go to work if I do all these things? Absolutely. So I needed money, so I was going to cut the welfare payments and put it back into these 4 things. And that's what I did. And the welfare mothers, they told me, if you provide daycare, health care, education, and transportation, we will come to Madison and support your proposals. And they did. Democrats were always opposed to it, but I always had welfare mothers with me supporting it. It was the darndest thing to see, is welfare mothers supporting Tommy Thompson, because what he promised, and he said, I'm going to do it and I'll introduce it, and that's what I did. And so I needed the cut in order to get money to put into. I wasn't using the money to, to take it away from poor people. I was using the money so I had money to put into programs that were going to enhance their ability and get them jobs and become self-sufficient. And I even testified about it in Congress. Congress, after I was so successful on getting people off of welfare, they asked me to come to Washington. I said, I'd go out there, and I testified in front of the House Committee on social programs, social welfare. And I said, you're not going to, I said, if you want to do welfare on the cheap, I said, don't do it. I said, you're going to spend more money up front, like I had to, in order to get this to work. And I said, if you do that, you may have a successful program. And that's what I did. And so then the Democrats took it out of the budget, and then I had to veto it back in. And Tim Cullen was very much opposed to that. And we talked about it. But I talked to some other people, and they said, you got to do it. It's the only way that you're going to make the system work. And you got to show that you're going to lead and get this done. And I did, and it worked out very well.
I wanted to ask about your style as governor. I found this characterization in the press of your first term. He seems to be everywhere.
I was. Just
How did you do it?
What?
How did you do it? I mean, I understand you move the governor's office upstate sometimes. You're trying to integrate the northern counties that's felt neglected.
Because when I was up in Superior, they said, you know, we'll vote for you, but we'll never see you. People don't care about Superior or northern Wisconsin. I said, yes, but I do. And so after I got elected, I said, I got to do something to show the people in northern Wisconsin. And so the first place I moved was Superior. And so I just made it, every year I moved to a different area of the state. First one was Superior. And we moved up to Superior, and we'd always set up our office in the chancellor's office on a campus.
Well, you're recreating the governor's office in another part of the state.
And I recreated and took the whole cabinet, everybody, up there, and we would pick out a region in Superior. And everyone had to go out and set up appointments, and I had to look at them and make sure they were doing it. And Tim Cullen will tell you that they got so tired out that he and Bavlich and a couple other people said, well, we'll fool him. We'll look where the governor is. Tim told me this. I think it's in his book, and maybe it is or isn't. But he says, I'll look at where Tommy's going, and we'll go at a different place. And when we'll work 8 hours, and we'll go play golf. or go have a good time. So they always went. Tim Cullen was smart enough to figure out where I was going to be, and so but we'd stay in the dorms. And we had, I think the first one was sort of interesting because Herb Grover was the DPI, and he was with us. And they forgot, that there were women's secretaries and men's secretaries, and they went into the showers, and some people had a few alarming moments, but it was an interesting. And we'd get there on Sunday night, would fly up or drive up on Sunday night, and we would play softball against the city. And so the first night was the Thompson All-Stars against the city of Superior, and they just beat us because they brought in all their young college and high school kids, and they just swamped us. And then we'd have pizza. And what it did, it brought us all together. And the cabinet people learned to like each other. And so they could work cross purposes. And that's what was so beautiful about it. And the people up there loved it. So they could come in and talk to we had the president of the university, Buzz Shaw. We had chancellors there. We had everybody associated with state thought it was a great idea, and they could come up and spend a week and really get a chance to see a particular area. And I did that every year, and it was just it was great for the government to work together, but it was great politically too.
So people up there responded well to you.
Oh, every place I went was just fantastic.
And it wasn't limited to the northern counties.
No, every place. We'd pick the Fox Valley. We went down to Platteville. We always went where there was a campus. River Falls. We went one year. We always the first day I set up office in the chancellor's office to find out what was happening educationally wise. Then we would move. But the first day, Monday morning, I walk in the chancellor's office. The chancellor would move out, and I had his office and talk over the education in the morning. Then we would have lunch, and then we would go someplace else in the city. Never to come back to that office. But then we'd have on a Friday afternoon, everybody had to come in, and we have an auditorium. And everybody came in on a Friday afternoon after traveling all over, and I made everybody give us a report on Friday afternoon. What they did, what they saw, what the problems were, what you were going to do about it. So everybody had an objective. And if you were the commissioner of banking, you went to all the banks and credit unions. Everybody had their people that they had to go. The Department of Natural Resources, George Meyer. And I tried to go with as many secretaries as possible. Everybody had me for a half a day. And so George Meyer, the Department of Natural Resources, had to get me into areas where I could see what was happening with NNR, DNR, agriculture, and so on and so forth. So I had really a first-hand knowledge base that I could come back and use to educate me and also to find out what the problems were and develop policies.
I wanted to ask you about local spending. That seemed to be a priority in your administration. Hold down local spending, which you seem to think was out of control.
Yes.
Can you describe what you did with that?
Well, it wasn't so much as that. It was. I had Joe Leon. First, I had Pat Goodrich as secretary, and then Pat Goodrich came in, left, and I had Joe Leon. And Joe Leon and I, we represented rural areas. He was my state senator for a while. And so he and I said, we have to do something because there was no way to control local spending without doing something about the teachers' union. And they were out of control. Maury Andrews was very, very effective, and he was the lobbyist for them. And they were by far the most powerful organization in state government. So we finally were able to reach a compromise, not with the teachers' union, but with the legislature to pass QEO. The QEO was passed, and that was the start of limiting local spending because we were able to hold down and put somewhat of a freeze on that. Because property taxes was a huge problem in the state of Wisconsin back when I came in as governor. It was a terrible problem, and people couldn't pay their property taxes, and it was the biggest complaint against state government. They blamed the state government, even though it was the local units of government that were levying the property taxes and spending the money. But state government, the local units of governments always blamed the state. They didn't get enough money, therefore they had to raise property taxes, so they blamed the state. And so the only way we could do it was to do something about holding down teachers' salaries, and we developed that. My wife was furious about me. She didn't talk to me for a week because she was a teacher, and the unions were just really mean to her because they were so adamantly opposed to any limitations whatsoever, and the QEO was passed. But it never said that they could not negotiate, but it put a limit as to how high they could go each year. And so that was, and Joe Leon did the best job of that. Joe Leon was a teacher, and he was a businessman. He was from central Wisconsin. He knew, and he was the local, and he was Secretary of Health and Human Services. He did the negotiating with the Senate and the House and the unions, and he was able to come up with the QEO package, and we were able to pass that in one of the budgets. I think it was the second budget.
The Democratic majority.
Democrat majority, but we were able to get it through.
And school choice was another initiative that began in your administration.
School choice was my idea, and Polly Williams came along. But Polly Williams had the reason that school choice came about is because I kept reading the statistics in Milwaukee about the number of young blacks dropping out of school, and I think the first year freshman 15%. You extrapolate that over 4 years, about 62% of the blacks in Milwaukee were young black males were not going to graduate from high school, and all I could see is Milwaukee is going to build prisons, and we're going to have crime, and we're not going to be able to build a city. So I had to do something about education. So I went down and I spent a good share of my time going around to talk to the ministers, black ministers, because they have the power. And if you want to get something done, I learned in the black community, you go down and talk to the black ministers. And I spend Sundays going to their churches, listening to them, and also preaching in a couple of churches. You know, not really preaching, but speaking about I needed their help, and I needed their help and support to get young black, especially young black males, to stay in school. And invariably they would come back and say, you know, we're busing them all over, and we never see our son or daughter. They go out to Wauwatosa, they go someplace, Menominee Falls, Waukesha, and we got good, you know, we got good Catholic Lutheran schools down the street. Why can't we send them down there? And so I talked to the minister and said, yeah, why don't you allow the families to decide? So let mothers and fathers decide where Johnny and Susie go to school. And if it happens to be a parochial school, a religious school, fine. And so I said, that's going to be a tough battle. So I finally got, Howard Fuller was the big spokesperson in Milwaukee, and Polly Williams, and they wanted an all-black school. They wanted to try in Milwaukee having just a black school, no other races. And I knew that was not going to work, and so they introduced it, and Polly Williams fought for it, but the Democrat caucus would never let it happen. And so Betty Jo Nelson and myself sat down, and we developed a school choice program. I put it in, I think, my first budget or second budget. I can't remember which one. But I put it in, and it got taken out. And I don't think I got it passed till 91. And I finally, when Polly could not get her all-black school, she took up the choice school. She came into my office with Howard Fuller and talked to me and says, can you support an all-black school? And I said, no, I can't support an all-black school. But I said I can support school choice. She said, I can't support school choice. So we had a division. Finally, she came back in, and we had another meeting with Howard Fuller. She says, I said, why don't we compromise? Why don't you try the school choice, and we'll see how that works. And so she reluctantly agreed to it. And she got it through with Betty Jo Nelson's help, the Republicans. She got enough Democrats in the Assembly to get it through and pass it. And then it went over to the Senate, where the Democrats were in control, and Gary George was chairman of the Joint Finance Committee, and everybody, you know, expected Gary George to take it out of the budget and kill it. Well, for some reason, Polly talked to Gary, some other black parents talked to Gary, and I guess somebody had said Gary is such a puppet of the teachers union, he could never do it, and Gary hated to be, categorized because Gary's a very smart person and very independent, and he was a friend of mine. And I talked to him and I said, Gary, why don't you just try and do something? I said, the people in Milwaukee need something because
you personally appealed to Senator George.
I appealed to Polly and I appealed to Senator George, and lo and behold, Gary George kept it in the Finance Committee, much to the chagrin. Everybody expected it to be taken out, and Gary George was the Joint Finance Committee chairman, and the Democrats were in control, and we passed it with Gary George's help in the Senate and Polly Williams' help in the Assembly. Democrats controlled both houses, and we got it through. And of course, I signed it into law. And then, following year, 2 years, we were able to get into religious schools. The first 2 years or 4 years, it was just choice schools, without religious.
Was there ever any doubt in your mind that you would run for a second term?
No.
You had expressed earlier that you didn't expect necessarily to get one.
No. I talked to Clauser, and I talked to Betty Jo Nelson, I talked to some of my friends. I said, I'm going to shoot for the fences. I said, you only get a chance at this job once, and so I'm going to do everything. I throw everything into the budget and do it. And we had 2020 transportation. We had school choice, we had welfare reform, we had economic development, we had everything in that first budget, because I never expected to get reelected because it was a Democrat state and the Democrats control both houses. And then the first budget, they passed, the Democrats took just about all my things out, and I think I had the most veto that's ever been handed down ever in the history of the state in the budget bill. I think 400 or something like that.
You are the record holder, and it was in the 400s, but I don't remember what year.
It was first budget, and everybody really, they call me Dr. Dr. Veto, and I did that. And Cloyd Porter was a state legislator from Burlington, and he brought in, the day I announced the vetoes, and he had a giant pencil that the lumberyard, big number 2. It was 6 foot, 8 feet tall, I guess. And he says, this one, and then he had a little stub like this one. And so this is what Tommy Thompson does to a budget. And it changed it, and the legislature was under a great deal of pressure. And Marlon Schneider was the maddest of anybody, because Marlon Schneider put something in on transparency or something that he was really pushing, and I vetoed it. He was so mad, and Marlon, was a friend of mine, and he came in just furious. And Tim Cullen was cautioning me not to veto so much, but Clauser said we got to do it. In Department of Administration, we had all kinds of power, and the young people in the DOA were finding different things I could veto and changing letters and so on and so forth. It might have been too much, but we needed to set the tone that the Democrats had to work with us, and that set the tone. And every 2 years after that, the Democrats became closer to me, and we were able to work things out much better. The first 2 years were just really cataclysmic, and Dick Shoemaker was a assistant majority leader, and when I introduced the budget, he says, this budget is dead. And he said, we're going to change it completely. Tommy Thompson will not realize what he is. And Tommy's a good guy, but we're going to show him who the boss is, because he should not be governor. Tony Earl should be. They never gave up, the fact that they had lost control of the governorship. So they did it out of spite. They did everything they possibly could to change the budget, because it was their way of telling people in the state of Wisconsin they were in charge. So I had to be just as tough and aggressive. And so I was, and we did, and we sustained every veto. And then every year after that, it became easier to negotiate with the Democrats.
Did you view that the veto power completely different when you were in the Assembly?
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. I thought, Pat Lucy, I was the minority leader. I was absolutely appalled that Pat Lucy and Tony Earl would use that in Martin Schreiber. So I was opposed to it. And but when I got there, Pat Lucy...
You got the giant pencil.
Giant pencil. Pat Lucy said, you know, use it. Use the power, Tommy. Pat Lucy and I became very good friends. And, you know, at Pat's funeral here in the Capitol, I was the one Republican. He wanted me to give a eulogy. Because we were both grocers' sons, and we grew up poor, and from rural Wisconsin. He was from Crawford County, and I was from Juneau County. There was kindredness, even though Pat Lucy sold my prison in Oxford, which I never forgave him for, but that was another story.
Well, that's another issue. You made crime fighting a major issue.
Yes, I did.
In the time you were governor, and are you satisfied with the results of your anti-crime initiatives? There are a lot more prisons now and a lot more prisoners than there used to be.
Yeah, there was, and we changed the probation and the parole system and everything like this. Looking back at my history, I would say that the veto power was too much for a governor.
It's been modified.
And I helped modify it. I can remember Bill Buckley came to town, and Bill Buckley, the leader of the conservatives, and he was here to give a speech and raise money for the newspaper on campus. I think it was the Herald, Badger Herald. That was when it was a conservative newspaper. Started out to be the counterpoint for the Daily Cardinal, and he was here to raise money for it. And Bill Buckley was really a wonderful individual, and in college I had written a couple articles for Insight and Outlook, which was a conservative thing, and my roommate Dick Wright had written for the National Review a couple of things. So I've read a lot about Bill Buckley, and he came here, and so we had dinner with him after his speech, and I was governor, and I thought he would really be supportive of. It was right after the vetoes, and I started talking to him, and he said, "Well, tell me about it." When I told him I would change letters and numbers and stuff like that, he said, "I don't think that's good." And here's my hero, Bill Buckley, telling me that I made a mistake, and I listened to him, and he says, "No person should have that kind of power." And I listened to him, and so you need item vetoes. The federal government needs it. You got to have a strong leader, but changing letters and numbers, which was started not by me, but Tony Earl did it, Pat Lucy, and Martin Schreiber did it. So I just cultivated it to a much more of a master science. They were in the baccalaureate class. I was the master's and the PhD, but I came to realize what Bill Buckley said was correct. And I've come to realize that we are too harsh on criminals. And my new life, I believe very strongly that what we should do is we should change one of our prisoners into a vocational school and allow prisoners to work their way, the right type of prisoner. We have too many people locked up that don't need to be locked up. And I would like to turn one of the prisons into a vocational school.
They would earn their way out of prison.
Earn their way out of prison, earn themselves a degree, and have the Manufacturing Association hire them. We're going to need skilled workers, and this is a tremendous category for doing that. So I'm very strong for that, and I think we need to change our sentencing process because it's too harsh for some people. And so you look at things, you go through life, and I don't become so set in my ways that I can't change, and I think that's a good thing. You evolve, and I've evolved around the item vetoes. I evolved around corrections and prisons, and it was needed at the time because we were too lax. We became too severe. We went too far, and we need to soften that. And my daughter is the public defender, head of the public defender, so I talked to her a lot about prison reform. But I'm big on prison reform right now, and I think we could do a much better job. I wish I had the power to do that because I would I would revamp the prison system, and I would revamp the probation and parole system, because it needs to be done.
You were elected to a third term in '94, and this time you ended up with a Republican legislature in both houses.
That is correct. First time.
How is that different? Better, worse?
Both. You got to realize that for 86 till 94, and I won. Charles Qualla was my opponent, and I won overwhelmingly, biggest majority ever, and carried every county, including Milwaukee and Dane County. Chuck Qualla was from Madison. I carried Dane County as a Republican. Nobody's ever done that before or since. And the only county I lost, and I lost that by 14 votes, was Menominee County. And if I only would have known I was that close, I would have spent the day up there and carried every county. But I think I got 70% of the vote or something, 69, 70% of the vote. It was just overwhelmingly. And I brought in, because of such an overwhelming, I was able to bring in the Republicans. But the Republicans been out of power so long that they thought, they deserved it. Power, they had been out and they'd been the minority, and the Democrats had used the power of the majority to, keep them down and pass legislation that the Democrats wanted and what I wanted and what I would agree to. And so the Republicans really wanted their day in court and their opportunities, and they were flexing their muscles and so on and so forth. That caused some problems, but overall we were able to really develop a good working relationship. So in some instances, it would have been nicer not to have the majority in both houses, but overall, if I had my choice, I'd much rather have my party in control of both houses, because I spent, out of the 14 years I was there, I think 18 months is all that I had the majority in both houses, because we lost the majority very quickly in the Senate the following election. So I only had a majority of both houses 18 months, and I still was able to pass more legislation than anybody else ever across the board.
I wanted to ask you specifically about your creation of the Department of Education in 1995. It was overturned by the Supreme Court.
Yes, it was.
Do you have any regrets about that? Would you have taken a less aggressive measure? Do you think the court was right in retrospect?
I've never really, when I lost, and I know there's never going to be another chance.
Well, that's what I mean.
Never going to have another chance. But I really think the governor, I really think the governor has to be able to play a bigger role with education. And the way it is right now, it's not
independently elected.
Independently elected, and it's in the spring of the year, so it's pretty much dominated by the teachers' union who gets elected. And so it's not the independent office on education needs. And the second Department of Public Instruction has got to be beholden to special interest groups in order to get elected, because there's no money, to get elected, so you have to do it. It really needs to be more independent. Either the election's got to be in the fall, either on a partisan basis, there has to be a school board election, a school board appointed, or there has to be, the governor has got to have a bigger role, because governor, in any state that really does well, you've got to have a strong governor pushing education. Education, K through 12, needs more power from the governor. And the governor really doesn't have as much power as he or she needs to. She can, it's, the only thing they got is the budget. And you need to develop strong policies, like I did on school choice and so on and so forth, because you got to improve the quality of education. You got to be able to make sure that more, I did it. I did it through apprentice training, which was one of the first in the country. I did it with school choice, which was the first in the country, and all this. But you still don't have, John Benson was the Department of Public Instruction, and he was very, very much in the pockets of WEAC, and he couldn't, John Benson was my friend, and I liked him a lot, but he couldn't go against it. He could get up to the wall, but that's it. And the teachers said no, and he'd back off. And you can't have a special interest groups dictating education. You got to be able to have more independence and be able to structure education better.
That was your thinking in the Department of Education issue.
Absolutely, without any doubt. I need it. I'm a change artist. I want to change for the better. I want to build Wisconsin, and I always did. That was my mantra. That was my motivating factor for running for governor. Is I wanted to make Wisconsin better because I had spent 20 years as a minority leader, and every one of my ideas got trampled and got voted down with the Democrat majority. I never had a chance to try my ideas, and my ideas worked. Transportation, education, welfare reform, economic development, all these ideas, most of my ideas are still the law of the land. Healthcare, the best healthcare law in the country was my idea on family care and also on badger care. Both of those were ideas that I came up with, and they're still the law of the land, and most states will say they're the best. So I did things that I thought could help make Wisconsin better, and education still needs to be improved.
I wanted to ask you about the appointment of the DNR secretary. That was another change occurred during your administration.
Right.
It had always been appointed by the board.
Yes.
And it was, I think, in your administration when it became a gubernatorial appointment.
That is correct.
What's your thinking on that?
Well, once again, governor's responsible. You elect the governor. The governor's got to have his or her people that they can count on and make the changes necessary. George Meyer was my friend. George Meyer was a Democrat. I was a Republican. But George Meyer never really was the change artist that we needed in natural resources. Good man. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. It's just that his philosophy is completely different than mine, and I wanted us to make Wisconsin better in all regards. And when education and natural resources, you got to go through a board or another person. You don't have the ability like I did and so many ideas. And so I was looking to make changes because I wanted to do things. And it certainly, you look, my environmental record is probably the best of any governor, even though I don't get the credit for it. I purchased more land than any other governor, including Gaylord Nelson and Warren Knowles.
Well, the Knowles-Nelson stewardship program.
I passed the updated. I signed it into law, and I purchased more land than Gaylord Nelson and Warren Knowles. I think I acquired more land for the state of Wisconsin for the people than those two combined. I got the Chippewa foliage, the turtle flammable flowage, and many other acquisitions. So, what's that? Sorry. Can you hear that?
I can hear it.
I thought I had it turned off. So I'm sorry. But the mining law, we passed the mining law. We passed the stewardship law, and all of these things were passed when I was governor, and I signed them into law. So I would say nobody can ever say that the environmental record of Tommy Thompson was second to anybody. And I wanted to do more, but it's the reason that I thought it was necessary to make a change. And if you remember correctly, after I made the change, Jim Doyle said, he was going to change it back until he became governor, and he vetoed the law twice because he recognized, like I did, that the governor's responsible. You should have the opportunity to appoint somebody.
It's an accountability issue.
It's an accountability issue, but also not only accountability, but it's also the opportunity to lead. And you elect the governor to lead, and you elect the governor to be, I think, to set the tone. And it's pretty hard to set a tone when you have to go through a board or go through education, which is a huge item in our state. And we want education to be the best. We got good education, so I'm not criticizing it. It's just that it could be better. We got too many individuals not graduated, and we have too many people leaving the state of Wisconsin after education.
Another issue that changed quite a bit during your tenure as governor, the gambling issue. Do you have anything to say about gambling and how it's evolved in this state from the state lottery to what we have now?
I would say that the gambling issue was I held gambling down. I would not allow any other games except blackjack and what was the other game? And Jim Doyle came in and promised the Indians, Native Americans, that he would open it all up, and he did. And the biggest opponent to gambling in the state of Wisconsin was Fred Risser, and he voted for it, which I never quite understood. But we voted for the lottery. The lottery opened it up.
You didn't see that coming, though. You didn't see this expansion coming.
I can't say that I didn't see it coming, but I saw the lottery, and then all the other states around are competing, and the federal law is such that they pass it. If the federal law would not have passed, we would not have gambling in the state of Wisconsin, but the federal law passed, giving the Indians the right to gamble. And there was tremendous pressure. The Indians wanted to gamble. And so I said, all right, we will have, what's the other game I had? I wouldn't let craps, I wouldn't let dice games. And we had blackjack, very limited. And boy, the tribes were opposed to that, but that's as far as I will go. If I would have been continued governor, we would not have had wide open gambling like it is. That was brought in by Doyle and his administration. And the Indians lobbied and campaigned and contributed big sums of money to have it. Mm-hmm. But I limited it to the reservations and the sites and the games. And it was a tough fight, but I held the line. And the Indians knew I would hold the line.
What are your recollections of the Brewer Stadium issue?
It was one in which I have lots of concerns about, because I know it would not. I knew the Brewer Stadium could only happen if I would support it. It would not have happened if I was not supportive of it. But it came about sort of in a haphazard kind of way, sort of a not in an honest way. I talked to Jim Thompson, the governor of Illinois. He had just gone through it, Chicago White Sox. And he said, Tommy, he said, sometimes you have to, sometimes you have to do things. Is this mine? Sometimes you have to do things that only you can do. And I had to make the decision that the Chicago White Sox could not survive without a stadium, and I knew that it couldn't happen without me. And he says, you're going to have to face that reality when the Milwaukee Brewers come to you. The Brewers came to me, and we had breakfast. Clauser and I had breakfast out at the executive residence. And Bud Selig and Mike Greavy. And they came out and they said, we don't want anything for the state. We're going to build a stadium ourselves, and we don't need your help. I said, great. I thought, that solves the problem. Little did I know that was not going to happen. I took them at their words. And
well, what year was that?
I don't remember what year it was. I can't remember. It was in the 90s. And then we had several other meetings, and he met with Milwaukee. John Norquist wanted the stadium downtown, and Bud was adamantly opposed to it. And then The Milwaukee Business Association was very much in favor of it, putting a lot of pressure on the city and the county and the state. And the city and county said that they would help build a stadium, and then Bud and Mike came back and wanted some help just for internal improvements, parking lots and highway changes and so on and so forth. I didn't think that was, I thought we could do that, and we should keep them here, because they never said that they were going to move, but they always led you to believe that if you don't do it, we're going to move, without ever saying it, and saying we're a small market, we need to help, and so they kept saying. And so first it was internal improvements, which I agreed to, and then the county agreed that they were going to help, and so on and so forth. And then a few months later, they said, well, it's going to be too much, and we're going to have to set up some sort of help and a district, and so I listened to them and agreed that I would help them, but they had to pass legislation. I did not insist, and I should have. My mistake was I should have insisted that they put in a referendum. The counties were going to be taxed, would have to vote for it. And the legislature, the Senate, put it in, and Bud and Mike and the Milwaukee Brewers did everything they could to derail it, and they did. They got it taken out. And so the night of the vote, I stayed there till 3:30 in the morning, and it went down, and at 1:30, the vote in the Senate went down, and by one vote, and they came in to see me, and they said, well, we'll look at it tomorrow. 3:30 in the morning, I was still in the office, and George Petak called me and said he was going to switch his vote. And I said, you sure you want to do that? Petak said yes, and he switched his vote, and he got recalled, but he voted and didn't require the referendum. And Racine was absolutely wild about it, because George had promised he would not vote for it without the referendum, and he did. He changed his vote, and it passed. And then after that, the Brewers said that they were going to put $40 million in, and we were supposed to get the state was supposed to get the signage, from the naming of the stadium. Well, Bud said he wanted to negotiate it, and somehow Clauser let him negotiate it, or somebody did, I don't know, and he negotiated, so he got the $40 million. So his $40 million was paid by the Brewers for the sign. So the Brewers actually didn't put very much, if anything, into the stadium, and that was a terrible mistake.
Do you think any or all of the 5 counties would have passed a referendum? Was that even a viable option?
I don't know.
Would you have supported a yes vote in those counties? I mean, would you have done anything to help?
I don't know. I would have said it's up to the counties. I would not have done it. But Brown County did for the Lambeau. Brown County had it, and this came up afterwards. And I think the legislature learned its lesson, and I certainly did. I should have demanded that we have a referendum, and I said I wanted one, but didn't demand it. And I'm sure if I would have demanded, I could have possibly won that. But the legislature had voted to pull it out. They had it in, and then they pulled it back. And I should have demanded that it be in, and I should have demanded that the Brewers put more money into it.
Capital renovation. What
Beautiful.
You were just mentioning it on the way down here.
All this is brand new under my leadership.
What was your role in that? How did that come about?
Well, it was basically this. The legislature was becoming more full-time, and there were so many beautiful. This is just an outstanding building, built for $5 million and finished up in 1918. And the artifacts and the paintings and and the woodwork, and there's so much here for $5 million. It was just a jewel. Everybody loves to come to the Capitol. I still think it's the most beautiful Capitol in the United States, bar none. It's much prettier than the federal Capitol, and it's the dome of the Capitol is only, I think, 5.5 feet shorter than the dome in the federal government. The dome, third or fourth, fifth largest in the world. I mean, this is a thing of beauty, and I looked at it, and I could see a lot of, we had cobbled together everything. We covered up good wood. In the governor's office, Dorothy Knowles painted that beautiful paneling because she didn't like the darkness of the cherry wood.
The conference room.
The conference room, that was painted, and
it was white for many years.
White, yeah, it was painted by Dorothy Knowles when Warren Knowles was governor. She was and it was just, I mean, a thing of beauty, and to restore it, and the fact that there was no air conditioning in here, and it was such a tough thing in the summertime to carry on work here. People just were, it was really hard, and I was worried about the paintings and the frescoes and up on the ceiling and everything like this, and so we decided, the building commission and I, under my leadership, that we should remodel and restore the Capitol, put air conditioning in, and redo the basement, because this used to be, I don't know if you knew this or not, and when the first Capitol, after this Capitol was the first Capitol, the basement was used for renting out to hog farmers in the wintertime. This down here was cattle and hogs were in the basement of the Capitol back, not this Capitol, but the one before this, the one that burnt down. And so the basements had not been finished or anything. And I just decided that, I had done so much for the state, and I wanted to leave this Capitol in the best shape that it possibly could, because it's got so much beauty. And so I decided that we would have to do it, and it would have to be an expensive undertaking, but the Capitol was worth it. And so the building commission went along with me. It was my initiative. Klauser went along with it. We put in underground over to DOA and to other buildings underneath. I don't even know all of them, and we did it section by section. And the Capitol, I think my office, the governor's office, was the last one done. Yeah. But it's a thing of beauty, and everybody comes here, and it was so there was so much, the assembly people and the senators would come in, and we'd have 3 or 4 or 5. When I started, there were 7 of us in an office down there, and we cobbled things together to make it work, make it passable, and it just didn't have the beauty that it needed. And so we remodeled it, and so it was, and then we gilded the Miss Forward out there. And this is a story that's never been told, but the day of the election, I think must have been the election of '90. We were regilding, resealing the Miss Wisconsin. I think it was the election.
Statue on the top.
Huh?
A statue on the top.
Yeah, and so I decided on election day that I was going to go up and touch the ball. And that was as scary. My security thought it was crazy, but it was an election day, and I think it was against Tom Loftus. So, and we never got pictures of it. And so I went all the way up there, and they had the scaffolding out and back. And I went outside, walked up the scaffolding on election day in 1990, I think, and touched the top of the ball. No governor has ever done it or ever do it again, but I did that in 1990, and it was absolutely awesome to look out and see the beauty from that perch. And it was the scaffolding done. And then when we redid the lady, we went and decided we were going to redo the whole Capitol.
I don't remember it being particularly controversial. In some states, it's a very controversial thing.
It was not, because everybody, had been here, people had been here in the summertime, and it was hot, and they saw how much you know, the good things, the Capitol, and it was a thing. People got a great deal of pride in this Capitol, and people like to come and visit and see it, and get their pictures taken, and so on and so forth. And I wanted to leave it the way it was originally built, and we did that, and I think it turned out absolutely better than any of us ever imagined. But it was not as controversial as I thought it was going to be. But the Democrats went along with it. Fred Brister went along with it as part of the building commission, and it was my idea. We put it in the budget. And every year, you know, we didn't do it. I think what would have been controversial is to try and do it in one fell swoop. We did it, you know, wing by wing, and over a course of many years, and turned out absolutely beautiful. The Cullens did a great job. And
took 11 or 12 years.
Yeah, it did. But it was the right thing.
I want to talk about your departure from the office of governor. You were appointed to the cabinet in 2001.
Yeah.
How did that unfold?
It was tough on me because I had suspected that George W. Bush would have asked me to join his cabinet. We had, when you're a governor, you are appointed. Somebody's appointed to be your mentor. And when I came in as governor, Bill Clinton was my mentor. And when I became the senior governor, the following year, George W. Bush.
Oh, really?
Was
this through the Governors Association?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I was appointed. I used Bill Clinton a lot. I'd call him and ask him advice, and he was very good to me. And George Bush hardly ever. Maybe once or twice George W. Bush should call, but be that as it may, it was sort of an interesting thing. And so George Bush was sort of my person that I was supposed to be supervising. And I'd call him regularly, and we became friends. Saw each other at the governance organization, and the election of 2000, I was also thinking about running, and I was a very close friend of George Bush's father. I'd stayed at the White House, and he'd take me out. He used to say to some people that I was his favorite governor until his sons got elected governor, and he invited me out. And I could have possibly had the job as Secretary of Transportation in his administration. He appointed me head of the Amtrak, and so I was very close. And when George W. Bush was going to run, I was thinking about running, and George H.W. Bush, the father, called me and said, "Tommy, if you don't run," he said, "I'm not trying to talk you out of it because you're my friend, but if you don't run, can you support George W.?" I said, "Absolutely." And so with that call and with talking to Clauser and Whitburn and other people in my administration that didn't want me to run, I didn't run. I should have run in 2000, but I didn't. And so George W. Bush came to Wisconsin several times campaigning. The last time he was here, we were down at the State Fair in one of those buildings down there that I had remodeled. We had 10,000 people there that night, 10 or 11,000, a huge crowd, and I introduced him. And it was an amazing night because that was the night that the press found out about George W. Bush's drunk driving. And George never thought it was going to come out. And we walked out the back door, and I was with the president, and the press was just knew there was something. There was something in the air. We had just had this fantastic rally a week before the election, huge crowd, and the press was waiting for us and really was in a vicious mood. We went out the back door, and the press was just all on George. "Why didn't you tell us about the drunk driving?" And George, you know, the first time it was confronted, I mean, George knew it was in his back, but he had never said anything. Nobody had ever asked about it. But, you know, after campaigning all day, this was about 9 o'clock in the night, and they really surrounded him. And I sort of took charge. I says, listen, calm down. The governor will take 3 questions. I don't know why I picked 3. And I says, ask him questions. The governor is not trying, let's just be sensible about it. And so they asked him questions, and George was very open. He said, yes, I was in Maine. Growing up, I've always told you that I used to drink, and I don't drink anymore. I made some mistakes. That was a big mistake. And I'm sorry that you found out this way, but you did, and I apologize. A couple more questions, and I said, that's it. And I helped the president, the governor into the thing, and I said, I'll stick around and answer any questions and let the governor go. So he got out of there, and one of his staff people said, Tommy, if we get elected, you got to come to Washington. So George W. Bush never asked me or about being it, but I could sense, you know, that they were interested in me coming to the administration. And so the night of the election, I had mixed emotions. I wanted George W. to win, but I really didn't want to have to make the decision about going to Washington. I thought I would be asked, which I was. And I love being governor, and I was really, you know, I don't know if I would have run again, but I had 2 more years left, and I was doing some nifty things, and everybody was happy. The state was performing well, and my family's the one that talked me into it. My wife and who never talked me into anything in politics. She's always very negative about me doing anything, and my youngest daughter, Tommy. And they said, we're in women's health. We'd like to have you go and be Secretary of Health and Human Services. The president had asked me, and a family had gone to Mexico on a Christmas vacation, and I had already decided that I was going to turn it down. And the
story going around was that you wanted transportation instead?
No, it wasn't that. It was just I didn't want to give up the governorship and go. You know, I think I was transport. The president offered me transportation. He said, the president offered me transportation or health and human services. He said, you can have either one. But he said, you got to make a decision. I said, I got to go and meet with my family. He said, go, but you got to make a decision quickly because I got to make decisions. I said, okay. So I went to Mexico, discussed it, and my wife and daughter wanted me to take health and human services and didn't want me to stay as governor. Says, you've been here for 14 years. It's time to go and do something else. And my wife always said, you know, I never wanted to not have you have that opportunity and end up, you know, retire and say, what if I would have gone to Washington? And so she was the one that finally convinced me. So I did. Very, very emotional time for me. And as you know, I cried hard the night that I announced to the public that I was leaving because I really loved being governor, and I did. So, but that's what it took place, and it was actually my wife and my daughter that convinced me to run, or to take it. And I called Bush, said I'll take, because Bush asked me, he said, you can have transportation, but I would rather have you. Health and Human Service is so much bigger, and I need your help there. So the president asked me to do it, and my family wanted me to do that one, so that's what I did. It was a great opportunity.
It's like being a cabinet officer. What do you do?
It's different.
What's your day-to-day tasks?
Well, I mean, it's
a big agency.
Huge agency. And people don't realize this. When you don't count the war, 23% of all money goes to the Department of Health and Human Services. There isn't anything. The Department of Health and Human Services is in your life and everybody else's life every single day. The medicine you take, to the food that you eat, to elderly programs, to children's programs. I mean, it runs the gamut. Run FDA, CDC, and National Institutes of Health. It's a fantastic department. Maybe too much, but it used to have Social Security, and then it was really. But it affects everybody's life, and it was a tremendous opportunity for me. especially a change agent, because I wanted to change everything. The problem, I always tell this story, and it's a correct story, is that when you're governor,
Yeah.
you can get up in the morning. You have to go to the bathroom. At my age, more regularly now than ever, and I always had ideas about how I wanted to change state government. And I'd wake up. I'd sometimes write it down. Sometimes I'd remember it. And by the time I get in the office at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'd call Clauser, or at the end I'd call Mark Brewer. And or somebody else, and say, this is my idea, let's go to work on it. And by 10 o'clock, I'd have people working on my ideas on how to change, make things better. When I became secretary, I still had the great ideas, but I found a big difference. When I woke up and went in and told the department, I had 69,000 employees, all who thought they were smarter than the secretary. So you had to get buy-in from them. You got buy-in from the department, and we go over to the super god. I didn't know we had a super god in our society, and that's the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and they turn you down 9 times out of 10 just to show you who the boss is. You do get by OMB ever. It goes to the superintelligentsia in the White House, and that's the young college kid that's never had a job, but worked for the president and got a job, and they all think they're smarter than the secretary and don't think anything good can come out of a cabinet office. And then if you do get by the superintelligentsia, the young college student who believes they're smarter than you are, it goes to the president, and if the president agrees with it, it goes to the Congress, and by the time Congress takes it up, it's time to retire. So that's the difference between being governor, you get things done, being a cabinet secretary, it's a lot more bureaucratic, you have to go through a lot more, but it's huge, and it affects everybody's life every single day, so you really it was a fantastic gig. Governor's better, but secretary also had tremendous opportunities to change. I guess we got to go.
It's 3:30 now.
Yeah, we're all right.
Do you have to go?
Okay. I have to go to Milwaukee, but it's wonderful.
All right. I appreciate your coming in.
So guys, while you're still sitting down, maybe we could do that just a little bit more smoothly. Like, hey, thank you for coming.
All right.
Okay, fine. I know it was tough for you. I'm all over, and I hope I'm not too animated.
No, you're doing a great job.
So that's all you want? Thanks for coming, or?
Oh, I mean, just what you typically do for the last question, just so we can get like a nice closer.
All right. Well, one thing I was going to ask, who are the members of the legislature that were your greatest supporters when you were in? And who were the ones that you had the most trouble with?
I didn't have that much trouble with legislators. The leadership was really good to me. Alan Say was the president of the Senate, and he was very helpful. And Betty Jo Nelson she was minority leader, and I put her on the Joint Finance Committee when I was minority leader. She was just excellent. She was by far my strongest supporter and gave me the best ideas. And but I had worked with all of these. Mary Panzer, was in the Assembly when I was minority leader. She was over and was the minority leader in the Senate when I was governor. So Mary Panzer and still is. Mary Panzer and I had a couple of businesses together, Senator Panzer. So just always, I had so many stories. I recruited so many legislators to run because that was the job of the minority leader is to recruit because you didn't have paid staff to do that. So you had to do it. And I traveled all over the state to get these young men and women to run. So I had all of it. I had such close relationship with the legislators that they really wanted me to succeed. I can remember the day that we had a small place on Swan Lake up in Portage, and I invited the Republican legislators to come up to Swan Lake to spend an afternoon to talk about whether or not I should run. And I expected a handful. The whole Republican caucus came up and said, "You're running, and we're behind you." And every single one of those individuals, not one, did not support me. And that's pretty unusual from all over. They were very energetic supporters. It helped me win because I knew that they would do anything they possibly could for me.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, Governor.
Thank you. Good seeing you. Great interview, and thank you for asking me the questions.
Thanks.